Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here at the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion Symposium entitled Responding to Climate Change Through Science, Religion, and Cultural Practices. Before getting started, I'd like to gratefully acknowledge the coastal Salish people, including the Duwamish and Squamish tribes, on whose ancestral homelands we are gathering on today, as well as all Native communities who make this place their home today as well. My name is Curtis Baxter, and I'm one of the organizers of this session, along with my colleague, Mrs. Lila Sloan Barrett. And before getting started and getting to this session, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our program, the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion program. The Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion, also known as DOSER, is one of 6 programs is housed in AAAS's Office of Science, Policy, and Society Programs. If you want to learn more about those programs and activities going to DOSER, I invite you to visit our AAAS program booth down in Expo Hall. The DOSER program was established in 1995. And this year's our 25th anniversary, so I encourage you to be on the lookout for some unique program regarding our 25th anniversary this year. The DOSER program builds upon AAAS's longstanding commitment to relate scientific knowledge and technological advances to the purposes, concerns, and interests of society at large. And we do this, so we accomplish this through facilitating conversations and offering and providing engagement opportunities for scientific and religious communities. And we accomplish this objective by a variety of projects and public events. Starting with public events, just like at GR today, we host and hosted a number of symposium here at the AAAS annual meeting. And we have another one coming up this Sunday from 3:30 to 5:30 in room 6A right over there. And that is on Death in the 21st Century, What is Left Behind. I encourage you to attend that. That's going to be a fascinating and interesting conversation there. In the past, we've done a number of symposium on a variety of topics, including biology resilience, so talking about and discussing how communities and individuals are resilient after moments of trauma and sense of trauma and PTSD, and after certain climate incidences such as Hurricane Katrina. We also have done a number of topics as well as on gene editing and ethics as well. So I invite you to look at our DOSER webpage, and these videos are housed and archived there as well. We also host a number of public lectures at AAAS headquarters. Each year we have a holiday lecture, which is usually held in early December. And those we have covered a number of topics as well. Just this past December, we've hosted the world-renowned climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe, and she did a conversation along with a respondent of the past bishop of the Episcopal Church, Right Reverend Katharine Jeffrett Shorey. And all of these, as well as more public lectures and symposium, are archived on our webpage, which is AAAS.org/DOSER, so DOSER. Moving on to projects. So we have 2 ongoing projects right now. The first I'd like to talk a little bit about is the Engaging Scientists Project. And this helps to prepare or helps scientists in a variety of contexts, either teaching or in research capacity and in informal spaces such as museums and aquariums, to be better equipped to have conversations and to engage publicly with various religious publics. One of the great resources from this project is a booklet that can be downloaded from our website, and it gives you a framework of the engagement, public engagement with religious communities, and some examples as well. The Science and Seminaries Project, a project that I co-lead with my colleague here, Dr. John Slattery, is a project that works to equip future religious leaders to be better conversant and to know where to find resources when it comes to science topics when they engage their future constituents. And we accomplish this by giving pedagogical and science resources to seminary faculty, connect them to local scientists to help them to integrate science into their core curriculum. And we have a number of those seminary faculty here with us today. And over the course of this project, we've engaged and we've worked with 26 seminaries over the course, and they have integrated science into 100 courses and held over 90 science campus-wide themes. So they're doing a great job there. Also, we have here is a number of completed projects, such as the Science for Religion Reporters project, where we have brought in the past religion reporters to come here and be immersed in these conversations of science, engage with scientists here. And then we also have had the Perceptions project, which was a project that worked with both scientific communities and the evangelical community, and we had a number of workshops across the country. And there are a number of resources from both of these projects, and you can find those on our website as well, AAAS.org/Dozer. Lastly, I'd like to ask you to stay connected with us. So the first line there is our email address. There's our website as well. And there's a scienceforseminaries.org website. And I would be remiss, almost forgot to mention that. And the resource out of the Science for Seminaries project is the Science to Wide Angle video series. That is a number of videos that are very short in length and cover a variety of topics from neuroscience, astrology, cosmology, and other topics. And these can be used in a variety of contexts, no matter where you're located, no matter where you work at. And they have accompanied with them transcripts and some study guides as well to generate conversation around them. And we're also on social media too, Twitter and Facebook, so please follow us there. And also, tonight we're having the Dozer reception, always a popular and well-attended Dozer reception. And that's going to be happening this evening from 6:30 to 8 p.m. in the Sheraton Grand Hotel in the Ballard Room. And then lastly, if you want to learn more and hear more about the Dozer program, some of my colleagues and myself will be doing a lounge session tomorrow afternoon from 1:30 to 3 p.m. in the Expo Hall. And so I invite you to come to both of those as well as our session on Sunday. Once again, I'd like to thank you all for being here at the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion Symposium on Responding to Climate Change through Science, Religion, and Cultural Practices. As the world drastically changes due to climate change, communities are working together to build resilience and enact sustainable practices for a better future on Earth for all. While outreach from scientists and scientific communities is essential to equip scientists for the effects of climate change, local community and religious leaders have become an underappreciated resource in the creation of climate resilient communities. Many community and religious leaders are helping their neighborhoods adapt by connecting historical cultures and practices with forefront science. This session will explore the interconnections between resilient communities, cultural practices, and faith traditions. Topics to be discussed include the current climate science data being used by faith communities to assist vulnerable populations, how religious and indigenous communities are adapting to become more resilient in the new world that we're facing due to climate change, and how elements of various faith traditions, cultural practices, combined with cutting-edge science can provide resources and tools for all communities today. So today we have a wonderful panel of speakers here that will really touch on all of those topics there and get at the heart of what we're looking at today in regards to this topic. We'll have 3 speakers with us today, followed by a discussant who will make some brief remarks about what we've heard today regarding the conversations from the presentations from the speakers. Then followed by Q&A with the audience. And so and then we have a microphone right there, so when it's time for Q&A, please line up and ask your questions there. And then I would introduce each speaker in turn, starting with our first speaker, Dr. Susan Bratton. Dr. Bratton is professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences at Baylor University. She holds a PhD in plant ecology from Cornell University and a PhD in interdisciplinary humanities from the University of Texas at Dallas. She has served as research scientist for the U.S. National Park Service. Dr. Bratton has published 5 books and over 50 book chapters and articles concerning religion and the environment. In 2014, her book, The Spirit of the Appalachian Trail, it received recognition as a choice outstanding academic title. In 2015, the International Society for Science and Religion, ISSR, elected Dr. Bratton as a fellow. She is currently authoring a text on religion and environmental sustainability. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bratton to the stage.
Hi, my topic for today is eco-dimensionality, which is looking at religion from multiple angles and its multiple functions in terms of environmental management. And I'm going to begin with just a little bit of an historic background, and then I'm going to emphasize Christianity because it has been kind of a sticking point in climate dialogue. Let's see here, I'm going in the right direction. One of the questions I've been asking for some of my academic projects is why it is that religion can function so well in managing some forms of natural or environmental resources, why in some cases it's been more effective than science and engineering and has been able to maintain sustainable systems through time. And one of the properties it has is this eco-dimensionality, where religious action in space and time is coordinated often with myth, architecture, and the arts. Ritual may be a very important part of this. And an example is the salmon fisheries of the Pacific Northwest in pre-colonial times, where large populations who were living in this very region were harvesting salmon annually on multiple runs. Religion helped to guide the division of territories for harvest by families and clans, which encouraged responsibility for the salmon. The sacred narratives provide instruction and admonish against wastage and disrespect. The iconography demonstrates not just the relationships of humans to each other, but to salmon and to other species. The myths concern instruction concerning proper use of technology, like not putting dams at lower elevation stream courses and blocking salmon runs. And the first fish ceremony halts capture at the beginning of each run, thus allowing escapement of each genetic stock and maintaining each of these stocks in the streams. So this is an example where all this is relatively coordinated and works well together in resource management. And let's not assume this is not a feature of world religions such as Hinduism, or in this case, an Abrahamic faith, Islam. And I think an easily grasped example here is Islamic gardens, which are express Quranic principles in their design. If you can read them, they express the unity of God. They use sophisticated water technologies and have since the Middle Ages, including rooftop collection, channeling water to the base of individual plants. The landscape architects who design them understand the way to use shade and microclimates to create pleasant environments, and they in turn provide a very pleasant entry. This is a garden that was originally attached to a mosque in Cordoba, Spain, into prayer and worship, or they maintain household spaces that are pleasant for family meals and for contemplative exercises. There's a feedback here to the religious life of the people who design gardens such as this, and then household gardens provide both food for the family and flowers and food for wildlife. So I call this eco-dimensionality. It anchors environmental management and religious conceptualization of space and time. The sacred spaces integrate into daily life, such as the Islamic household, and the community benefits not just from sustainable harvest, but from shared celebrations and cultural enrichment. And I think it's important to understand religion's interface with the environment in this way. Now, I'd like to look at, I'm just going to concentrate on one religion here because I don't have a lot of time, but religion and energy and techno-industrial culture. And religion can also present some barriers to dealing with things like our current climate concerns. And one of the first aspects of this, and just to use an example of one of many, is that Christianity has interacted in industrial and fossil fuel-based culture in positive ways. In the 19th and 20th century, Christians awarded moral efficacy to industrial innovations such as the railroads that allowed penetration and civilizing of new territories. They carried the missionaries out to the deserts and into the forests, and then they brought rural products back to national markets. And railroad companies in turn incorporated sacred features, and a great example is the pulpit rock where Brigham Young supposedly sermonically emboldened the Latter-day Saints to journey onward to new enterprises in Utah, and included things like this in their advertisements. And there's a meta-narrative here of a great civilization. This is St. Pancras Station in London. It is not a Gothic church or town hall. This is a railroad station, and the adoption here of the historic revival architecture is giving you a certain cultural message about the railroads that you see every day and don't often think about. So we have some pretty heavily patterned views of what industry means, and often use religious motifs to express these. Then let's not have an elephant in the room. Then there's the question of why people don't act. And to give you some examples from recent studies done in mostly heavily industrialized culture, and that R in Norgrad should be at the end, but anyway. A sociologist did a study in Norway trying to determine why Norwegians were not acting on climate issues, and she found that hierarchy of needs explanations were not sufficient. It wasn't just, I have to drive my car, and political alienation among the mellow Norwegians was not a major factor. But she thought that they were having trouble with ontological security, that they were benefiting from North Sea oil. Norwegians do not like being bad people, and therefore they were hesitating to act. The American Academy of Religion, in cooperation with the Public Religion Research Institute, did a study. This is based in 2011 survey data, where they found only 5% of Americans thought it was the highest national priority. Skepticism did align with political parties. The Tea Party, which is now largely defunct, had the greatest number of skeptics, Republicans slightly less, and then Democrats far fewer. In fact, this was probably more important than denominational alignments. Many Americans do see signs of the end times in dire climate events. It's just a little bit less than half in this case, but only a little more than a third reported occasional sermons or education at their home congregations, and that concerned all faiths. The religious bodies were simply not really dealing with this. And just published a few months ago is a book by Robin Veldman, where she held focal groups with evangelical congregations and looked at different views of the end times to see if it was making a difference or not. She notes, and I think quite appropriately, that many evangelicals are cool millennialists. They're interested, they have a view, but it doesn't drive their ethics. However, there are a few hot millennialists out there. She suggests that the embattled mentality contesting the liberal takeover of the universities, government interference, and the elites, which happens to include scientists, was an important factor among more conservative evangelicals, and this is a form of political alienation. So this is a different result than those Norwegian studies. And when evangelical leaders released a climate initiative in 2006, this is the "What Would Jesus Drive" story in the newspapers. Other evangelicals who had active media platforms or were pastors of large churches contested them. There was actually an internal battle over ethical authority in evangelical circles concerning this, and the others forwarded skepticism as the biblical view. And it's important to remember that evangelicals do participate in conservative think tanks, as do some conservative Catholics, and so that a lot of this has political ideology concerning free markets as well embedded in it. But let's look at the other side and ask, when Christians are responding positively and trying to do something about climate, what does that look like? What's causing a positive response? And I'm going to show a couple of British examples first. One of them is St. James Piccadilly Church, which really is just a couple blocks from the statue of Eros in Piccadilly Circle. In London, this church was heavily bombed during World War II. They had to meet in an aisle because they didn't have a roof for quite some time. And then after the war, as they tried to rebuild, they found themselves in danger of becoming a redundant church because they couldn't attract Londoners to services. So they got an upscale vicar who really took the congregation in hand, and they began a lot of ministries to attract Londoners who were very politically savvy, very interested in international issues. And so they were ahead of their time in 2003 by installing photovoltaic cells on the roof of their administration building, not on their Christopher Wren church. Note that. And they have an indoor meter that is next to the nave that keeps track of how much solar energy they're gleaning. But they're doing a lot more than that. They do an eco-liturgy once a month. They have educational speakers on environmental topics. They've started an eco-group, and they conduct rituals like blessing the bicycles. They also participate with the greater London community in events like Earth Hour and hold candlelight vigils in response to that. This is in the center of the church, and their education events are very sophisticated, again, corresponding with their sense of mission. Their garden is very nice and attracts the neighbors, and this is part of their environmental program, but all of this contributes to the life of the community. It does a lot for the congregation. It helps them to fit in to the environment they're living and working in. A second example here, and this is true of a lot of religious institutions, is Gloucester Cathedral with its 11th century nave and Gothic choir. And when you look at historic structures, you have to ask how they're going to install solar, what they might do to go to zero carbon to get their own electricity down. And this is a tough challenge. And they've got more than that. I think this gargoyle is great. It's a nice little political comment here. But they have solar on that roof, and notice you can't see it. They have a high pediment, which is to their advantage. A local company, My Solar, helped them work on this. They had an original lead roof from the Middle Ages. There are a lot of mosques and Hindu temples and other religious facilities that are in very much the same shape. They need something imaginative, and in this case, the engineers came through. They lifted the solar panels above the lead roof. They left the original in place there and spared it for historic reasons while they put the solar up, and so you can only see it from the tower. And here's the dean expressing eco-dimensionality by blessing the solar array. Now, what about the evangelical side? And I'm not advertising my own university here. I just want to talk about how they got involved in trying to deal with energy sustainability. And in the 1990s, well before I was there, they planned a LEED certified building for the Truett Seminary, which was a new seminary. And so for some reason, they think environmental conservation is very important to their central worship space. And I think you have to see this as symbolic when you're reading between the lines. This was a time when there was a lot of squabbling in the Southern Baptist Convention and among Baptists concerning literal biblical interpretation. Baylor came down more on the side of community service. The seminary is named for a Baptist minister who was very active in raising funds for Baptist schools, orphanages, and hospitals, set a great example in terms of civic service. It was certified in 2009 as the university's first LEED building with its embedded chapel, and it is a symbolic synthesis of Baptist commitment to participation in local civic welfare and the centrality of shared worship and preaching in Baptist life. And subtle as this might be, this is a case where it's converging with the main ministry of the university. The second most important religion at Baylor is and so we now have a LEED certified practice facility which has been recognized for its innovation. And our business school, very important, is now also LEED certified. And in 2007, Baylor contracted for wind energy with an anticipated savings of $2 million a year in the improved contract negotiations. So again, you're seeing this, and we're just hiring a climate modeler right now. And I certainly would think that the Texas Baptist Convention would have to be considered evangelical here. So what's the difference between this and climate denial? And I think it's the pro-Texana part of it, that Baylor feels very strongly committed to serving the local communities so that when we're doing our urban gardening, the food is donated to the Salvation Army and to homeless people in the city to provide greens. And the projects often have this flavor, so it's very, very compatible with the community values. And notice its integration to architecture and the spaces on the campus. And to give you another example of fitting this into what's a central part of the religious community, this is the African Methodist Episcopal Church's climate statement. The AME was started because white Methodists were blocking African Americans from sitting in the front of the church or serving as ordained ministers. And it reads, climate change hurts God's creation and people. Black people are unduly impacted. The health of children, elderly, and those with chronic diseases like asthma are at greater risk. Our faithful in the Caribbean, Africa, and rural communities are suffering from floods, drought, and disease. The AME is supporting climate policies and action that will move us away from dirty fuels that make us sick and towards safe, clean energy. And this is a very good fit with the overall mission and concept of the AME. So to get to the communalities here, the sustainability or zero emissions programs are consistent with denominational policy. They express core values and they solve problems like the possible conflicts with the historic architecture. They're putting the meter near the center of the nave and supporting civil rights are just very important matters to these communities. Overall, the programming contributes to community life and welfare. It provides pleasant social spaces, saves money. In the case of the student-oriented institutions, it puts the students into community service in positive ways. There's a very high eco-dimensionality in these projects, and there are multiple linkages among environmental programming, other missions or ministries, including sports or recreation, mini pilgrimages, and home missions. And these programs all enhance ontological security. They make people feel better about their futures and who they are in the religious context. They're not conflicted enterprises. And so I'll just sort of end here. We can talk about this in the discussion section about how scientists can connect a little bit better with this. And I think that shared projects and discussions are possibilities, trying to figure out what the religious communities really value and what their needs are. In a lot of these Protestant situations, there's a high interest in international and home missions, and possible bridges there to deeper dialogues about climate. You can try to open doors through religious venues. This happens to be the Wild Goose Festival, an environmental group meeting in North Carolina, what's a modern version of a camp meeting, to talk about bringing environmental programming back to their home churches. So I'll end with that, and we can talk about these exchanges further.
Thank you, Dr. Bratton. Our next speaker is Dr. Vijay Nagarajan. She is currently the chair and associate professor of the Department of Theology and Religious Studies and in the program of Environmental Studies at the University of San Francisco. She writes and teaches on Hinduism, gender, ritual, ecology, climate, the commons, energy, and ethics. She is active in the American Academy of Religion and in environmental movements here in the U.S. and in India. Her book, Feeding 1,000 Souls, Women, Ritual, and Ecology in India, an exploration of the Kalam, is a deep exploration of popular women's ritual art. The Kalam and the multiple ways in which beauty embodies ethics. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nagarajan to the podium, please.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here, and I really want to thank Mr. Curtis Baxter and the AAAS for inviting me to be a part of this, august occasion. The title of my talk today, probably the better title, would be The Critical Relevance of the Upanishads to Climate Chaos Alleviation. So first I want to take you back to the 6th, 7th century BCE, before the Common Era. This is the time that the great religious text, the Upanishads, came into being. This group of texts was both continuous with the earlier Hindu texts, the Vedas, and a break from them simultaneously. The Vedas were predominantly ancient Sanskrit verses honoring the basic natural elements, such as the god Surya for the sun, the god Agni for fire, the goddess Bu for earth, etc., and an expression of deep gratitude for their key roles in both human and non-human lives. Interestingly, the Upanishads began just around an intensive phase of urbanization in the Gangetic river valleys of northern India. I argue that this phase of change is parallel to our own contemporary changes. Just as ancient urbanization deeply affected Hindu village societies in the 6th, 7th centuries BCE, so too our contemporary rapid global urbanization that we've been experiencing for the last 200 years is equally substantial. The teenager Nachiketa, who I'm going to be talking about, an ancient story, is similar to our own young teenager Greta Thunberg from Sweden and the youth-led Sunrise Movement, who've asked world leaders to move forward on reducing climate chaos to reduce current and future deaths. One of the interesting illuminations for me while I was working on my book, Feeding 1,000 Souls, was the role, or rather the imagination in the Hindu tradition of the householder stage of life. The role of the Hindu householder and its sense of limits as one of the 4 stages of life, the others being a student, a forest dweller, and a wandering ascetic with few belongings, is critical for our understanding of what to do. Part of the problem is our lack of understanding of proportionality between what we need and what we think we need. The Hindu householder is limited to occupying only one of these 4 stages, and in fact is required to support the other 3 stages, or the other 3 ashramas. So during the householder stage, you are allowed, for 20 years or so, to accumulate possessions to raise your family, the next generation, but once that work is completed, and they give you a very specific set of indicators of how you know when your householder phase is completed. Your hair starts turning gray. Your children have a grandchild, and so on and so on. So they're very particular. And when that happens, you automatically ought to move to a lesser consumption of worldly materials. The household itself, which is really interesting to me, is considered to be filled with 5 slaughterhouses or 5 killing fields, quote unquote. so that even setting up the household is considered to be of great negative karmic effect. So why is this? What are these 5 killing fields? Maybe we've never heard of this. The broom, the hearth or the fireplace, the grinding stone, the mortar and pestle, and the water pot. These sites that are essential and needed, necessary for establishing a household, necessitates the random killing of non-human creatures without our explicit awareness of doing so. The karmic consequences to a Hindu are considered massive to each individual participating actively in setting up and maintaining a household. One of the ways to alleviate this huge negative karmic residue incurred on the householder is to do 5 sacrifices or 5 offerings every single day. This is from the 7th century BCE, just to remind you. And this was the following: give away food to wandering stranger animals, that means not your pets or domestic animals. Give away food in your household until your kitchen pot is empty, so no storage. Give away food to random, unexpected, unknown stranger guests. So non-reciprocal generosity is key, not someone you would expect some reciprocal gift back. So every day you must give away gifts that you have no guarantee of ever getting anything back from that person or that creature. How do you do this? You give food to crows, other birds, to trees, to water spirits, etc. So each of these 4 stages of a life are considered around 20 years or 100 years, depending on the century that this text comes from. And one of the questions, this paper and this, I've been teaching a class on Hinduism and climate for the last couple of years at USF. Especially, this emerged for me after the big fall 2017, storms in Houston and Florida and Puerto Rico and North Carolina and California fires as well, when we just literally in Northern California couldn't breathe for some weeks. And so for me, what was I going to do about this? And part of it was to think about transforming every part of my life to deal with this new situation. And I decided I teach Hinduism, so I might as well look at climate and see if there's anything in the toolbox. There are over 1 billion Hindus. And so I was very moved by Pope Francis's Laudato Si. And I thought, okay, what do Hindus have to say in dialogue in response to that tremendously brilliant document? So this is a small effort towards that. So 3 of these stages of life revolve around a more ascetic, primarily non-desiring life. So the only stage where you're supposed to activate your desires is the householder stage. But the householder stage is supposed to support actively all the other stages. So it's the only justification for living a primarily material life. So it occurs to me that the Hindu householder stage is the central stage in Hinduism for the accumulation of property, of creating and searching for profit, etc. It is the time, say, we need storage. So when your hair starts going gray, your children bear their children, then you're free to give away all your possessions to the next generation or others and move with or without your wife, depending on her wishes, to the forest ashram or a forest village to live collectively with others in a deeply simplified way for the rest of your life. And if the 4th stage, which is the wandering beggar ascetic, is an extremely rare choice. You really need courage for that one. Not everyone can do this. And you're usually alone, and there are very strict rules about begging, about sacred begging in the Dharmashastras. For example, you're required to not beg when the householder's cooking fires are still on or when the family is still eating. So you only have a right to beg after the family's cooking fires are stilled. You can only beg once a day, and you can only beg for 8 handfuls or mouthfuls of whatever the household chooses to give you. One of the profound realizations for me during my research of this book was that a household, by its very definition, was considered to be a great sin. So why is that? Because the idea is that when you build your house, you are evacuating all the beings whose homes were set up there. And there's no way to expiate that sin. It's so great. No matter how good of a life you live, your entire life, you cannot expiate that sin of setting up a household. So what can you do? The best you can do is to feed 1,000 souls. And that's the title of my book. And the idea is that at least the minimum you can do is every morning at sunrise, just right after you brush your teeth, as the first ritual act of the day, you lay down rice flour to feed 1,000 stranger souls. And it's literally edible art, and it's literally eaten by ants and earthworms and squirrels and birds every single day. So I'm going to show you some slides of this. I'm going to go quickly because we don't have a huge amount of time, but I'm just going to show you. Let's see. Oops, here we go. So these are some elaborate ones. Oops. Where is it going? So this is one of the grand ones for a Pongal festival. And this might take 2 hours, and it's one long continuous line around a matrix of dots. And there's actually a chapter on mathematics also. There's mathematicians and computer scientists who are working on understanding array grammars with these traditions. And every household has them in front of their house. Oops. This is my mother at the Smithsonian. This was part of the seed of this book. This, you see a village site from a top view, and you see every household, and it's quite diverse. Some women get into it, some women don't. It's done by women every morning. Sometimes it's done collectively in this way, you can see. And here's a beautiful one with an expansive lotus flower, and the idea is that that this drop of the column is a symbolic connection to the idea of infinity through the universe. So that it's like the universe is a fabric, and the column is just one drawing in that fabric of time and space. Just going to quickly show you. There's also figurative columns as well, and cartoon figures. Here are the crows eating some of the rice. Here's the last one. Yeah, I just want to leave it there. So one of the stories that really moved me from the Upanishads is the story of Nishiketa and his conversation with death. It starts with it's the Katha Upanishads, which is one of the oldest Upanishads. And Nishiketa, his father gives away some old cows. And Nishiketa's like, Dad, you're just giving some old cows away, and you're making it sound like a really big deal, like you're super generous. And of course, the father gets mad with this criticism. He's a 16-year-old teenage son. And the father says, go to hell. And then, he's like, oh, okay, I'll go to death then. So he decides to visit Yama, the god of death. He stays there for 3 nights. Yama's busy doing his work. Yama eventually comes back and says, oh, I didn't treat you like a hospitable guest. I need to give you 3 boons. He offers him 3 boons. The third boon is really interesting because Nishiketa says, I want to know why we die and what happens after death. And Yama says, I can't tell you that. That's my secret. You have to find out. And he's like, no, I really want to know, and you're the best person to ask. So then he's very impressed. He teaches him some other things, and Nishiketa's a very quick learner. So he says, no, don't ask me that question. I will give you all the princesses you desire, all the palaces you want, all the kingdoms. And Nishiketa says, I'm not interested in any of that stuff. I want the answer to this question. This knowledge is more important. And Yama says, oh, you're an unusual kid, that you're not tempted by all these material desires. And he says, actually, your practicing of this lack of desire is exactly what you need to do to face death. That when you face death, you need to keep the consciousness that your life is going toward that end point every single minute of the day. And so that you're not tempted by these, slight material desires. And I think of Nishiketa, and I immediately thought of the young Greta. And I said, this text was done 2,700 years ago in the shadow of the biggest urbanization in northern India at that time. And we are in the shadow of the biggest urbanization of our industrial civilization. And we need, and what is Greta and the Sunrise Movement telling us? We need to keep the knowledge of that collective death of both human and non-human creatures every single minute of the day. To lift up, not as a temporary thing or 1 hour a day or whatever. It's actually, we need to figure out the societal ways that we can keep aware of that every single minute of the day. And that's where I think, when I think about 1 billion Hindus, the last 30 years we've jumped into the modern industrial civilizational with jumping in with both feet. And the current generation mostly has forgotten all this stuff. So part of my work, I feel like, is kind of reinterpreting these past documents that could be very useful to remind Hindus of, one of the poles of their memory palace, in a sense. Like, how do we live in this world knowing that the householder phase should be of a limited time period, not forever, not for our whole life, not for our children's whole lives, etc. It should be done at a limited scale. So this is what I think, the whole call for proportionality, living in proportion to the news of what we know in terms of climate and in terms of facing, how do we understand the notion of collective death from this individual death, facing of Nishiketa to the story of conversation with. So we each need to also have our conversation with Yama. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nagarajan. Our last speaker is Mr. Todd Mitchell, and I want to stop and greatly appreciate him for filling in for someone who was unable to be here today, and I want to thank him for that, for filling in at such a short notice within 2 days preparation time, so thank you for that. Mr. Todd Mitchell, he is a Swinomish tribal citizen and the director of the Swinomish Department of Environmental Protection. He is a graduate from Dartmouth College with a BA in Earth Science and Film Studies. He also holds a Master of Science degree from Washington State University in Geology, specializing in hydrogeology, igneous petrology, and geochemistry. Todd works for Swinomish as a geologist and indigenous scientist, researching the tribe's water resources, including traditional ecological knowledge, tidelands, surface water, groundwater, wetlands, and salmon habitat restoration research. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Mitchell to the stand.
Digwisid, thank you. Filling in kind of last moment, so hopefully I'll be able to hit the points I need to hit, and didn't have time to rehearse, so just gonna have at it. Thank you for that introduction. The title that we had come up with, I added in there, Swinomish Tribal Communities, Adaptation to the Effects of Climate Change. My wife helped me put this together quickly. So my introduction, I like to talk about the Swinomish people. We have long-standing traditions of protecting and honoring and thanking Mother Earth for the resources that nourish our people. The culture of the tribe is intrinsically tied to the health of the environment that sustains the habitat for these resources. Our work is strongly place-based and centered not just on protecting the natural resources themselves, but also sustaining access to cultural practices that they support. We use the knowledge of our ancestors combined with scientific research to develop innovative ways to protect our environment and the resources, not just for now, but for the next 7 generations. For us, it's not enough to simply work for the survival of a species or a habitat. We strive to protect and preserve resources and their place in the Swinomish culture. Go forward here. So I'd like to start off with the importance of place. Why is the place important to us? Because this is where our ancestors came from. From time immemorial, our ancestors lived in our area, the Skagit River Valley, the Salish Sea, and they found it really important to stay in that area. That's where our resources were, specifically salmon. During the time of the treaty time, our ancestors wanted to remain in their area. They didn't want to be relocated to another area or another reservation. Place was important, so much so that they accepted the limitations of usual and customary areas, as it's called in the treaty, to a very small area than their original usual and customary areas. So here's Swinomish. It's in the northern Puget Sound, central Salish Sea, about an hour north of here from Seattle. Our reservation is very small. It's a handful of square miles. Our tribal enrollment is about 1,000 members. And actually, they said at our general council meeting, 1,011 members as of last year. And as of last year, we employ 1,000 people between our tribal government and our enterprises. So I like to use this map because it's from our language dictionary. The language of this area is called Lushootseed. And it kind of shows, kind of this wide area around the Puget Sound, which has a similar language. So we have family, cultural ties to everybody up and down the Puget Sound. We are signatories to the Treaty of Point Elliott, in which tribes from all the way up to the Canadian border down to here, including Duwamish, Suquamish, are signatories to that treaty. So that's where we base a lot of our protection of natural resources on, that we have treaty reserved rights to harvest natural resources. Let me look at my notes here. I wrote notes hurriedly too. So our place, like I said, this is where our resources were, and we have a spiritual connection to our area. My family and other families believe that our ancestors are still here with us. So the work we do, the way we live on the land, the way we work on the water, our ancestors are here. They can see that. So we need to honor them by doing the best we can and utilizing the resources and protecting them. But over the years, since the time of the treaty, 165 years ago, things have changed quite a bit. The tribal people have gone under a lot of cultural adaptation. Things have changed a lot. Really kind of started with the time of the treaty, moving from their usual custom areas to a small reservation, and really the U.S. government's at the time policies to try to eliminate tribal people. Our people were sent to boarding schools in the late 1800s, early 1900s. My grandparents were a part of that. They went to the boarding school. They were native traditional speakers right up to the time they passed away in the late 80s. But they didn't teach that to my father's generation. They didn't teach that to my generation. So we have this long history of, that's just one example of long history of cultural and historical trauma. So the tribes have been trying to dig out of that ever since. And we're still doing that. We're still digging out of that. We have many, social economic issues, housing, drug use, substance abuse, domestic abuse. Really, really hard to help our people when they have this historical trauma. But, we still maintain many of our old ways. People of the salmon, salmon culture, salmon fishing, subsistence harvesting of shellfish, clams and crabs, hunting and gathering, still very important for us. Here's one of our places that we find sacred. In English, it's Lone Tree Point. In our language, it's Chulki. there's one big tree there, which is like our national monument, really. So, our traditions, we follow traditions passed down orally through our culture. We didn't have anything written down in the past. It was all oral tradition. So we follow some of those old ways. So, part of our springtime rituals or ceremonies is the first salmon ceremony. All up and down the Puget Sound, other people follow that too. We're honoring the salmon. So my dad tells that story of the salmon people live in the deep ocean in a longhouse. In the spring, they send their first messengers to our rivers. We catch those first messengers, and if we honor them by having a ceremony, sending their bones back out to the ocean, they will swim back to the longhouse and tell the rest that we are honorable and that the rest of the salmon should come. And those salmon are the ones that sustain our people when we catch them like this. It's quite a sight to be able to see beach seining like this, catching all these fish that will sustain our community. So, yeah, we have a lot of issues. Now we pile on top of it, climate change. A lot of work, right? So it is a lot of work. So we, embarked on, an initiative to think about this. Back in 2000, we established a climate change proclamation saying, we will look at this. We will see how we can adapt and mitigate on our tribal lands. See if I put my notes here. Sorry. We found that climate change is a challenge to the continuation of our traditions and our culture. So we are actively addressing this challenge. So we came up with that at Proclamation. We moved that into developing a climate change impact assessment report, one of the first tribal one of those in the nation back in 2009. Piggybacked on that, a climate adaptation action plan, outlining all the actions we could take in part or in whole that we could help address these climate change issues on our tribal lands. So we have many strategies in there. I kind of try to boil them down to some main points. This one is prioritization. We needed to take a look at what resources were important to us, what lands were important to us, and trying to come up with some metrics to figure out which ones we should prioritize, which was the best use of our time and our resources to put into adaptation strategies. One of our important places, here's another picture of Lone Tree, and we wanted to make sure we put time and energy into protecting our sacred places, our places of usual harvesting of clams and crabs, or upland resources, berries, wildlife, to really kind of get at what are our traditional foods, how does that relate to our lands, and how does that relate to adaptation strategies. So it is kind of divided up into, we looked at coastal resources, looked at upland resources, but also the human side of things, human environment, human health, as well as our infrastructure. So some of our strategies are relocation. What things can we actually move? Shellfish, you can move those. You can grow them and put them where you want. Other parts of the tribe, our fisheries department has been looking at, can we build clam gardens? Basically, increasing the area of a specific tidal elevation that you can grow a lot more clams and, make a wider area as an adaptation strategy of, making more habitat available. Since our reservation is limited and, seaward migration, landward of beaches, this is one strategy. Like my notes, sorry. We looked at, reintroducing the native oyster in many places of our reservation, Olympia oyster, both as, helping water quality, but also as, bringing it back. It's been gone in our area for quite a long time. Other strategies are, restoration of both bulkheads to increase nearshore habitat. This product is near and dear to my heart at Kukatali Preserve. It's on the reservation. It's tribal land that was brought back into tribal ownership and co-ownership and co-management with state parks, called Kukatali Preserve. Back in the 1920s or 1930s, this part of land, a tombolo, two spits of beaches coming together, was filled in and with a road for private residents. And we took 7 years of research and grants to remove that road, restore the beach. 7 years of hard work, and it was all done in a couple weeks. So it's pretty fun to see that kind of thing. So a lot of nearshore projects to increase, enhance salmon habitat, or those species that help salmon habitat, forage fish, and so forth. But not just in this nearshore, but nearshore is important to us because we're about 90% surrounded by salt water, but also uplands. We're interested in protecting habitats around the Skagit River, upriver for spawning habitat, and doing a lot of road changes and plantings and those kind of actions to help protect our salmon habitat resources. But also, some areas, there is no way we're going to move. We can't move from the reservation. It's the last remaining land that's ours. So here's Lone Tree Point. And, we really started looking at, how do we maintain, that area for salmon harvest. And here's a picture that our chairman took on the left saying, we're having issues with the sea level rise, we're having issues with high tides, and it's affecting our ability to do that beach seining. So we embarked on research to look at this area, do some beach nourishment in the correct way to make sure it fit our habitats and fit our location. But we have a long history of utilizing this place. So the picture in the bottom left from Mohai shows Lone Tree Point, back in the 1950s, where people would spend their whole summer out there to do beach seining. So why is it important? It's because our ancestors used this a lot, and we still use it a lot ourselves. So I'll go forward. Okay, so one of the things we've been thinking about too is, how do we involve our community in climate change? How do we involve our youth in science? I've been working for the tribe for 20 years, and we've had a hard time getting, more professional tribal members back working for us. We have quite a few in the technician level, but we're trying to figure out how do we get more of our own youth to go to college, hopefully come back and work for us. I think I would be one of the outliers or one of the first to go away to school, go away to college, and get a science degree and come back and work for us. So trying to figure out how can I be a mentor, how can I facilitate and use my provision to help our next generation, whether the next generation are any of our tribal youth or even my son or daughters, to be the next leaders, to be the next me. I need somebody to replace me at some point. So hopefully not soon, but it takes a while to train people up. I started off as kind of a low-level specialist and worked my way up to department head, and it's been a journey of learning. So how can I mentor those coming along to be the next ones to help tackle these issues of resource protection and tackle these issues of climate change, tackle the issues of sea level rise, because they're not going away anytime soon or at all. So But we're not going away either. We are staying here on the reservation. We're using our traditional knowledge to help us answer these questions in a way that our ancestors may not have had the answers, but we can use the knowledge to the best we can. So this is one of our programs. We started a high school, after school Indigenous science program because I've been thinking about that for, probably, 19 years and 11 months to think about how we get more of our youth in here. Since I started my department, it was myself and one technician. Now we're a department of 17 that work strictly on reservation, on environmental and climate change issues. So this was started to, now that I actually have the capacity and basically the human resources capacity to get a lot of stuff done, I told my staff to let's do this. We need to get our youth out to our beaches. We need to get our youth out to our forests, teach them about our resources because they are going to be the next generation of stewards. They're the ones that take up the reins of protecting our resources and tackling climate change issues. So I think I had any notes here. So here's a picture of my daughter. She helped us with research back in the day, going to the beach. It's a lot of fun going to the beach. But I think I'm blessed with the tribal leadership that had the confidence in me, had the confidence in my department to provide the resources to think about these issues. Like I said, I started the department with 2 people. They've through grants but also tribal funding provided resources that we can expand that up to where we are now because we have serious issues we have to deal with. So we made a lot of progress among all of our tribe, setting up these long-term strategies and plans and so forth. But I think we've done it so darn effectively, since 10 years ago with our assessment and action plan, that we don't, necessarily have climate-specific projects. We don't have climate-specific people, but it's been disseminated out widely among all of our staff and all of our departments that, every project that you do has some aspect of climate change in it. So while we're not per se, specific climate change projects all the time, it's just part of our work now. It's just to include that, both the, outreach with the public and honorable community engagement, to learn what our community sees as issues like climate change, but using that information to really have an adaptive management plan that fits the needs of our community, fits the needs of our reservation. So with that, I'd like to finish up, I guess. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. So we're almost to the Q&A point. So we've heard some great presentations and discussions here, or points here. So get your questions ready. And now I'd like to introduce our discussant for this session. Ms. Patty Bowman is the Executive Director of the Intercommunity Peace and Justice Center in Seattle. IPJC is sponsored by 22 communities of Catholic sisters. Prior to her work with the IPJC, Patty was Director of the Outreach and Advocacy at St. James Catholic Cathedral here in Seattle, Washington. Seattle, Washington. I was thinking about Washington, D.C., excuse me. And she's also an avid and active advocate and educator on climate here in Seattle as well. So please welcome Ms. Patty Bowman to the stage.
Thank you, Curtis, and thank you, everyone, for your attention to this. And thank you so much to the presenters. I can say I've learned a lot. I imagine I'm not the only one who can say that. And it's no small thing to try to summarize what I've heard. So let me just share a couple of thoughts from what I heard from the 3 really wonderful presentations. In thinking about the role of the faith community connected with science on climate and other environmental issues, it's pretty clear from what we heard today that the faith community is not one monolithic entity. There's great variety. There's not uniformity among different faith traditions or within denominations within traditions. Some of them clearly have more experience of integrating deeply spirituality, religious practice, prayer and worship events, that sort of thing. And others, maybe that's new for them, or in some cases, even the religious tradition has worked against environmental sustainability. So we can't make overall generalizations. The other thing I heard clearly was then the best responses from faith communities are the ones that integrate very naturally and organically the spirituality, the doctrine, if you will. I loved Dr. Bratton's slides of even as it appears in architecture, what do we say symbolically? The rice drawings, fabulous. Visual symbolism within religious traditions is so important. So what we say with our words matters, but what we say with our art, with our practices, can be even more powerfully spoken. Another thing I heard clearly was that religious traditions have a long arc, right? I love the reference to some of the Hindu traditions coming from millennia ago. Religious traditions have been part of what we bring to the picture is responding to past trauma in a way that can speak to current trauma, so that the extent of the crisis that we face today has had echoes in previous crises in our religious tradition's history. And so some of that history can be in dialogue with what we're facing today. Coming from a Christian Catholic perspective, I always hold on to hope that the worst thing that could ever happen has already happened, and that's not been the end of the story, right? And so as gloomy as the climate crisis can feel today, I keep saying, no, our ancestors in faith have had terrible things happen before, and we've held on. I love the sense of the importance of place that we saw with the Swinomish tribe. Some traditions have that greater sense of place. My own Christian tradition has been not so rooted to place. It's been about taking the faith out to other places and evangelizing and the missionary impulse, which has had good and bad results as it's tapped in with, it's been linked in with colonialism and et cetera. So to understand, all places are sacred. All places have that connection. Another thought that I heard was the sense of how do religious traditions connect between human species and the rest of creation? So strong is the sense that humans are the pinnacle of creation and everything else is there for our benefit. And we are trying hard to reclaim, no, all of creation is sacred, all of creation reflects God. So we need to honor all of creation. So I don't want to take too much time summarizing. You all heard the same thing. I would like to invite our panelists back up. Is that good now? And to take a seat for questions and answers, or responses, I should say. And while they're coming up here, I want to pose a couple of questions to you. The introduction to this panel said, faith communities are an underappreciated resource in helping with this response to the climate crisis. And so I would ask, and Dr. Bratton spoke to some of this a bit in her remarks, how can we find greater dialogue and partnership between faith communities and the scientific community? And in particular, how can both be of support to and stand behind the leadership of Indigenous communities and other communities that are being most directly affected, so that it is not outside solutions being posed upon, but really lifting up the voices of the people who are most living the reality. Please. So any responses to those questions, and then please others come forward with yours as well.
I think that for Hinduism, I think it's been
a complicated moment, I would say. I think there's a way in which Hinduism does have like a long arc of history in terms of 5,000 years of civilizational place in the subcontinent, and yet I think that there's the sort of blooming of desires for modernity in modern life, including me, all of us. I think it's made into shadow that which needs to be retrieved again, in a sense, as a toolbox. So I think Hinduism is really coming very late to the climate crisis, I would say, as a faith community. There aren't, because I've been working in the religion and ecology movement in the last 25 years, and it's just it's not waking up. I think that there's such a falling in love with modern desires that it's hard to see through that yet. So I think that's where, and also there, a third of India still does not have electricity. So I think we have to also remember that. We have to remember the kind of, there's some people who have too much and there's some people that still don't have enough to eat. So that's what we have to figure out.
I think that's a tough question. I think on the Christian side, one of the things that needs to happen is Christians need to really dialogue with each other and come to a more consistent social position on this and stop fooling around, quite frankly. And right now, on the Christian end, there's a lot of interference with other people's interests, and that's wrong, and we need to get it straightened up. And I think we have to talk among ourselves a little bit about that. Another thing I think that Christians can do is we have a lot of resources, and we can help to open the dialogue for everyone. We need to relax a little bit about other people's traditions and background, and allow people to come forward from their own perspective. A simple example being on the radical Reformation side, which would be the Baptist position, there are problems in dealing with sacred place and ritual in other cultural settings. And I think we have to sort of discipline ourselves to understand this and be very open about it.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about, community engagement with my own community to make sure that, we're doing things in a way that, respects the traditions of our community and the way we communicate and, move projects forward. So it's always been a, kind of a learning experience for myself, even, have been, part of the community, all my life. But learning it in a different sense when you are somebody who gets things done eventually, and protecting these resources. So we've definitely been able to become more knowledgeable about things in certain areas, but we still need those allies. We still need those people with expertise to come and help, but they need to come and help us on our terms. Both in what we think is needed for the community, or what the community has directly told us that they need. So our climate initiative, that was a series of monthly meetings over 2 years to get our community input into it. I had a series of meetings with our education people and parents about developing our Indigenous science program. What is the need that we would hope to fill, and helping with science education, but also help with hopefully career development at some point. So allyship is definitely needed, but we need to do it in the right way, and we're always open to that. But we've gotten burned in the past a lot, so a lot of information has been taken from us, and it's hard to get. So while we didn't have things recorded ourselves, things recorded by anthropologists or ethnographers and that kind of stuff, and I was doing a project trying to get some of that information. It took me 2 years to get a copy of these notes. It's like, well, you can come here and look at them, but that's all you can do. So that definitely hits home with me of trying to do a cultural or traditional plant project with information that was collected from our elders, but not given back to us. So at least now we have it, but we're very cautious about allowing that information out because even stories, so any bit of stories, I treat that as data, but that's somebody else's data, so I can only use that if I'm given permission. My dad's story, I can use that because he gave me permission. But all that kind of stuff, it's data in some way, so we need to respect that.
We don't have a ton of time, but please, questions or comments or responses from the group? And perhaps if you're comfortable, you might share if you're also part of a faith tradition or have had work with, collaborations with local churches or faith-based organizations.
Hi. Is this, oh yeah, I'm just taller. Thank you. Is this on? Great.
Yes.
That was really great, really insightful. My background is in plastic pollution, and so I'm very much a scientist, and that's what I'm coming to this with. And I just wanted to ask, and I think a lot of you did touch on it, that from a scientist perspective and someone who does work in the pollution realm, I resonate a lot with Greta and what she is doing and what she's saying, in that it's not enough to say that we have survived this and that we have been fine, and our traditions and our cultures will persevere through that. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on how potentially scientists and cultural practices could get involved to maybe take it one step further, other than that just like this is what we're doing in our small communities, because as you mentioned, it's not monolithic. How it can spread further so that it resonates with more people, that it's not enough just to do something yourself, but we have to change as a whole.
I think one of the critical contributions that different religious traditions can do is kind of meta categories. And that's what I'm trying to work on, like meta category of facing collective death. How does each of our traditions think about death? And what are both our individual and collective conversations about death? And so that's one of the things I'm thinking about. And also, like, for example, the notion of waste. Amitav Ghosh was a wonderful writer and thinker. I was in a conversation with him, and one of the things he said that really was so obvious, I was like, why didn't I think of this before? But he said the problem of climate is the problem of waste. And so if simply put, if each of us in all of our different traditions can come up with a proclamation on waste, how does each of our religious traditions imagine waste? How do we reimagine waste? How do we think about not creating any waste? And in some ways it might seem oversimplified, but there are also kind of rules of behavior, right? Of social behavior, of ecological behavior, of cultural behavior, that is, I have a concept called embedded ecologies. And so, like, how do we embed ecological constructs, that are already within our texts and our practices, and how do we lift them up as kind of meta categories that give us kind of rules of operability that we can deal with new situations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we've been thinking about those kind of things. So our climate engagement group is kind of has been morphed and is able to get it into make it into a standing one of our Senate standing committees, so we can meet all the time and think about these things. And we host an annual clam bake at Lone Tree Point for the community. And think about that over the years, like how do we reduce waste within our own tribe? How do we get that information out there? And at the last one, I think it was like our 15th or 16th annual one. Some of our staff were like, we can think about this in the terms of what did we used to do for waste? Because we spend a lot of, surprisingly, I spend a lot of time doing construction projects and building things and restoration things, and we don't want to do any digging on the reservation without having our cultural monitors there. Because everywhere along our shoreline has used at some point, and there's middens there. But when we, inadvertently or purposely dig into these middens, what do we find there? It's all natural materials. It all decomposes eventually. So there's shell, there's burnt wood, there's things made out of bone, there's things made out of stone, all natural. So how do we use that to think about how we use modern materials? How can we get back to using things that do decompose or use less or things like that? So so our committee's been thinking about those things, like how do we get that information out? How do we roll it out to the entire tribe? Because we still have that issue of we still work on things of convenience of we have community gatherings every month or more than every month, and we have plastic forks, we have plastic cups, we have all that kind of stuff there. So it really does it's going to take even for our small tribe, going to take a cultural shift to think about those things of what are we using and how do we use things that are less destructive.
Just speaking from responding to the waste, Pope Francis in Laudato Si, who you referenced, talks about we need to reverse the throwaway culture. And it's a culture that throws away the goods of the earth, and it also throws away people. So please.
Hi, I'm Rosie. I'm a PhD student at Washington University in St. Louis. My question is for Vijaya. So back in the UK, I studied Understanding Hinduism at Oxford, where they didn't have any focalism because there's a lot of literature, as you quoted, but also what can we do going forward to focus on these particular issues and from a Hindu standpoint?
I became an environmentalist when I was 12 years old, so I've been kind of dwelling on this question: how could, because when I ran into Native American traditions in California decades ago, there was so much familiar there. There was so much that was deeply familiar to me as a Hindu. I was like, wow, this is, honoring Bhudevi, and in fact, the column is done for honoring Bhudevi every day, so the earth goddess. So, but I think there's also aspects of all of our traditions, religious traditions, that are yoked in a way, like a yoga, to modern civilization, and it's increased, like and so I think, for example, who is really popular in Hinduism right now is Goddess Lakshmi. So Goddess Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth and abundance, and abundance in relation to concrete material wealth. So she's hugely popular, right? But she's also the goddess of health, right? And so if we can shift the emphasis and create it, like since you're a nurse, category of health that is tied to Lakshmi, and that wealth can actually cause ill ease or dis-ease, so I guess that's where my act as a religious studies scholar, an environmental studies scholar, is reinterpretation, right? And bringing back, like mapping out. I think that's what we need, is kind of a worldwide mapping project of whoever can think together, both individually and collectively, on what are the concepts in Hinduism that could apply to us right now. I mean, we have 10 years, right?
I think we're out of time. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you to the panelists.
We can stay around for a minute.
People will stay around for conversation later.